C'est la confiance. It is confidence. These words of St. Therese are the title of the Apostolic Exhortation released today to mark the 150th year since the birth of St. Therese. It is confidence and nothing but confidence that must lead us to love. Pope Francis says that these striking words of St. Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face say it all. They sum up the genius of her spirituality and would suffice to justify the fact that she has been named a doctor of the Church. Confidence, nothing but confidence, is the sole path that leads us to the love that grants everything. It's interesting to me that Pope Francis chose to release this exhortation today, on October 15th, the feast of St. Therese of Avila, when St. Therese's feast day was only 2 weeks ago on October 1st. However, he points out that this is no accident. He writes that its publication on the liturgical memorial of St. Therese of Avila is a way of presenting St. Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face as the mature fruit of the reform of the Carmel and of the spirituality of the great Spanish saint. Pope Francis begins the exhortation by pointing out the centrality of Jesus in the life of St. Therese. She is Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. Jesus is that child. Jesus is that face. Her one desire in life, and even now in heaven, is to love Jesus and to make him loved. We know that St. Therese's way of living this love for Jesus is called the little way, the way of trust and love, in which we recognize our own littleness in order to be raised up into the arms of God's mercy and love. She wrote, "I always feel the same bold confidence of becoming a great saint, because I don't count on my merits, since I have none, but I trust in him who is virtue and holiness. God alone, content with my weak efforts, will raise me to himself and make me a saint, clothing me in his infinite merits." But we might say, what about me? I'm different from Therese. I'm not a saint. I am a sinner. Pope Francis responds, even so, her boundless confidence encourages all who feel frail, limited, and sinful to let themselves be elevated and transformed in order to reach greater heights. For St. Therese writes, "If all weak and imperfect souls felt what the least of souls feels, that is, the soul of your little Therese, not one would despair of reaching the summit of the Mount of Love." St. Therese even had hope for the greatest sinner of her time, the triple murderer, Henri Pranzini, whose conversion she prayed for as he was led to the scaffolding for execution. Pope Francis writes that Therese was conscious of the tragedy of sin, yet she remained constantly immersed in the mystery of Christ, certain that where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. The sin of the world is great, but not infinite, whereas the merciful love of the Redeemer is indeed infinite. Therese testifies to the definitive victory of Jesus through his passion, death, and resurrection over all the powers of evil. And in the end, Pranzini took hold of a crucifix and kissed the wounds of Jesus before he was executed. St. Therese was so aware of the deep and personal love that God had for her. And Pope Francis points out that St. Therese said to Jesus, "With your little hand that caressed Mary, you upheld the world and gave it life, and you thought of me." It's this awareness of God's intimate and personal love for you right here, right now, in the midst of your anxieties and addictions and sins that will ultimately bring about your healing. Jesus thought of you. But of course, this love does not stop with ourselves. It impels us then to go out and to share that love with others. And so in imitation of Mary, St. Therese acted on this love in the simplest things of her daily life, such as dealing patiently with an irritating sister or showing compassion and care to a sick nun. Therese realized that love is the heart of the church and is at the root of all vocations. And Pope Francis points out the importance of that message for us today. He says that it preserves us from being scandalized by the limitations and weaknesses of the ecclesiastical institution with its shadows and sins. So when we're overwhelmed by the weaknesses we see around us and tempted to despair, we can turn away from the politics, from the gossip, from the judgment, and ourselves be that love that is so often lacking in our world. Pope Francis writes that amid the suffering of her last days, Therese was able to say, "I count only on love. In the end, only love counts. Trust makes roses blossom and pours them forth as an overflow of the superabundance of God's love. Let us ask then for such trust as a free and precious gift of grace, so that the path of the gospel may open up in our lives." I want to conclude by sharing my favorite part of this apostolic exhortation with you. But first, I just want to encourage you to read this short document for yourselves. You can find a link to it in the description of this video. And there you can also find links to some of the writings of St. Therese if you want to learn more about her spirituality. So at the very end of this apostolic exhortation, Pope Francis summarizes in a very powerful way the relevance of the message of St. Therese for us today, 150 years after her birth. He writes, "In an age that urges us to focus on ourselves and our own interests, Therese shows us the beauty of making our lives a gift. At a time when the most superficial needs and desires are glorified, she testifies to the radicalism of the gospel. In an age of individualism, she makes us discover the value of a love that becomes intercession for others. At a time when human beings are obsessed with grandeur and new forms of power, she points out to us the little way. In an age that casts aside so many of our brothers and sisters, she teaches us the beauty of concern and responsibility for one another. At a time of great complexity, she can help us rediscover the importance of simplicity, the absolute primacy of love, trust, and abandonment, and thus move beyond a legalistic or moralistic mindset that would fill the Christian life with rules and regulations and cause the joy of the gospel to grow cold. In an age of indifference and self-absorption, Therese inspires us to be missionary disciples, captivated by the attractiveness of Jesus and the gospel. Dear St. Therese, the Church needs to radiate the brightness, the fragrance, and the joy of the gospel. Send us your roses. Help us to be like yourself, ever confident in God's immense love for us, so that we may imitate each day your little way of holiness. Amen.